Space Talks with Z is hosted by America's Future Series great friend and advisor, Zaheer Ali. Space Talks with Z provides a forum for thought leaders to share insights and recommendations on how America and its allies can stay at the forefront of exploration, commercialization, and defense of space. Please visit our website to register to see all of Z's content and our many other programs for free at www.americas-fs.org.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of Space Talks with Z. We have a couple of very special guests here with us today, one of whom, as soon as I say his name, we probably don't need too much introduction after that, but I'll give it anyways, at least from a personal standpoint. And so let's jump in. We have with us Mr. Orson Scott Card, author of the Enders game series and Past Watch and many other books, award-winning author. His books have been made into movies and shorts, and he's influenced pretty much a whole everybody since he started writing, both who is in technology, interested in space, or just interested in humanity and what we might become. So thank you, sir, for joining us today. Really, really glad to have you with us.
It's my pleasure.
And also with us is Joshua Carlson, who after serving has become a leader in the discussion of space power. His book, Spacepower Ascendant, is a very important book for anybody interested in this continuing tension of worldviews to understand, because he specifically contrasts the domain theories that exist between the Chinese culture dominated by the CCP in recent history and of course our view here in America. So please check that out. We'll have links to the work of both authors when this video is posted down below. So thank you, Josh, as well, for joining us.
Yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you, Zaheer.
So, gentlemen, I'm going to toss something out there right now. This is an amazing time for myself. I feel like a lot of what I never thought would happen in my lifetime is happening. When I was younger, and Josh, but when Josh and I were kind of in our teens and college years, it did not look like humans would be doing tourism in space. Space was the province of defense and government, and we were getting some relevant things out of it, learning about Earth system science, and of course, American space supremacy is a backbone of air supremacy, which is a backbone of our ability to exert hegemonic power around the world. And for anybody who doesn't like American hegemony, wait till you see the other guys. So we may not be the best, but we're the best you got. And yet now, William Shatner is actually an astronaut of sorts, right? Captain Kirk has gone to space. We're sending up people. We're sending up a lot of stuff. We're building rockets that people are jokingly calling BFRs, big effing rockets, because they're just at a scale that we almost didn't imagine since the 60s, but for civil purposes. So given all of that, the question of should we go, what should we do, and why are we going really is back. And there's a lot of sides to this. So I'd love to toss it out to you, gentlemen, and particularly to you, Mr. Card, given that you've imagined so many futures of humanity in different ways and different pasts. How do you see this connecting from where we have been through ages of exploration? Although exploring a place millions of people already are is kind of an interesting discussion, all the way through now, where perhaps we have the first opportunity in human history to get it right. So I'll stop there and leave it to you gents to jump in.
Well, I just have to say that human history tells us that we're going to get it wrong over and over. We have some Roanoke colonies where we have no idea what happened to them. And they won't have blended into the local population because there is none. And so we're going to have disasters. We're going to have tragedy. And people who go into space are going to have to be very brave for a long time because you're putting your entire trust in machinery that can fail. That was built by not the lowest bidder, but built by someone that is doing it as effectively as possible within a certain budget. And that is, in effect, saying doing it wrong. Because if we wait to get everything right, we'll still be sitting here looking up into space in 200 years, because it's impossible to get it completely right. I appreciate the fact that we have people with ridiculous amounts of money who are putting their obscene fortunes at risk in order to do what our government decided not to do because they couldn't sell it to the American people. That's the biggest hurdle we have right now, is how do we tell the American people that it actually is important for us to go into space with a big stick, speaking softly, but still a big stick, and keep the peace there. Because if we don't, then we've lost, and somebody else will be keeping their version of the peace, and we're not going to like it. We're going to be as upset as Brits were under the European community, because they didn't quit to make more money. They quit to remain England, to remain Britain. And we Americans do not take well to being told what to do. And when we're told what to do by somebody who can drop projectiles onto any American city at any time with no means of prevention, you're definitely going to be a second-rate power, maybe third, because we know that out of all of the millions, the billions of people in China and India, on average, they're smarter than we are. On average, they're hungrier than we are. And their governments, India still has the democratic problem of getting the people behind something. But China does not have that problem right now. They will. There will come a time when they have to face the wrath of their own people. But they can coast a long time on the terror state that was constructed under Mao. Now everyone there who remembers their past thinks things are so much better now, and they are. They just don't know that they're nowhere near as good as they are in the West. Just as it was such a shock to me when in 1971, as a young Mormon missionary, I went to Brazil, which was a civilized Western country, except I found out that the culture was radically different from anything I had ever supposed, and not in a bad way. Some wonderful things that I still do, that I still cross my sevens, because even though I don't put a little tail on my ones, but you cross a seven or it ain't a seven, and things like that, just trivial things, and yet culturally we're still strangers. And now I think of going back to visit France, and I think, is France still there? If I go there, will it feel like France? The place where I lived for a summer, Cagnes-sur-Mer in the south, now is, I remember when I got there, I looked at, what's wrong? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And I finally realized there aren't any Black people here. I live in North Carolina, and that's part of the landscape, is white people and Black people mingling, coalescing around different centers, etc. And none of the Black people were there. Well, I understand now that in the very place where I was, that's just not true anymore. The Black people are there, and as African immigrants, and France doesn't know what to do or how to handle it, while still keeping their self-image. And we're facing the same problem right now, is that we have a vast immigration of people coming from Latin America to the land of hope and opportunity, which doesn't exist to the same degree it used to, but which we have thrown open the borders, and a lot of people who are eager to become Americans are coming in, have come in, and are changing what it means to be American. There's hardly a country in the world where you can take a camera out on the street, show the film or show the video in America, and I don't look around and just see Americans. They all look like Americans to me because that's what America is everybody. And we don't know yet what to do with that or how to live with that. And if we talk about going to space, will there be people lined up the way they are at our border? If we cross that boundary to leave our effective atmosphere, who is going to want to go? And what is their incentive going to be?
So I think that's a great opportunity to jump in and
Yes.
set a little bit of a baseline first, and then I would love to get into that question of who is going to go. So as we look at the current trip to space, we see a couple of things emerging that I have never seen before in the history of space, short though it may be. And two particular ones that stand out is that we are dealing with a commercialization of space to a level that has never been seen before. And obviously, as it's continued to grow, it's continuing to develop. In the book, Spacepower Ascendant, I put forward a idea of how to think about space. And I posit that there are different phases of development that space, like all domains, has to go through. And what's really unique is both the exploitation, that is the economic development of the orbits, and the fact we have companies now for the first time being able to make significant amounts, several companies able to make significant amounts of money in orbit. And secondarily, coming up during this next decade will be for the first time an expansion outside of, and that is a permanent placement of facilities and potentially personnel on another celestial body, that being the moon. Both China and the United States have said that they will go back to the moon and establish permanent bases by 2036, which is the latest time that the International Lunar Research Station, which is the base that China and Russia have agreed to build together, that is going to be built on the moon. Hopefully before that, we have the Artemis base as well. This is unique because this is the first time that we get to benefit from all of these elements that eventually can develop into commercial, but permanent placement on another object that lets you set up facilities, that lets you set up refueling. There's all sorts of logistical benefits you gain from that, which if you go back to Mahan in an old book on sea power, he talked about the importance of coaling stations, which are basically refueling points in other continents and other countries, and that lets you expand your naval reach far beyond your shores. Otherwise, you can only go as far as your ships have fuel. But once you can go beyond that, then you have the ability to reach all the way around the world like we do. And in space, I would consider that the Space Force is the Navy of the 21st century. The ability to start refueling on the moon and then continue on beyond that, they're looking at refueling in orbit. They just had a successful test of that, I believe last year, the year before that.
I think it was last year. Both Orbit Fab and the NASA version have demonstrated that.
Yeah, and this is absolutely incredible. The ability to refuel yourself. And by the way, SpaceX is designing their rockets to be able to refuel in orbit because it provides you so many benefits. So all of this background is great. That is being done at the same time as the Chinese are clearly, in my opinion, I would even use the word adversary or even enemy, not just competitor. Competitors suggest that they are trying to achieve some goal that we can both kind of compete toward. Jonathan Ward did a great book. I would highly recommend anyone read it if they get a chance, China's Vision of Victory. And he basically traces all the way back to Mao's first speech in Tiananmen Square, talking about the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And what that means, even though that sounds, I mean, who wouldn't want rejuvenation of their nation? But what that means is that China wants to reclaim their place of premier power in the world.
That's right.
And that same beat of rejuvenation has gone from Mao all the way to Deng Xiaoping to the current Xi Jinping, and throughout all of this, it is a constant beat of China positioning itself to be the premier power in the world, with using the capabilities of their people and the resources and industry and technology that they have stolen, mostly from the West.
So just to jump in on that point, right? This is something that people don't always understand about China, because I think it's worth double clicking on this concept, right? Even their language of this, Wudan, views the world as China and China as the world, and everything else being somehow there to support and under the direction of the benevolence that is the Chinese state. And this is and I was in Beijing just a few years ago, having a very fancy meal with a party member who and it was really amazing to sit across from, frankly, an adversary. And we knew that we were adversaries, but there's that kind of guest friendship that exists. It was a very fancy meal with probably the best oolong tea I've ever had in my life. It's amazing. And he said to me something that I tell everybody that I talk to China about. I said, you have to understand, and he said to me, this is a direct quote, you have to understand, Zaheer, it's not communism the way the Soviets did it. Most of you guys in the West think it is. It's not. It's Confucianist communism. They have overlaid or really, to use a mathematical term, convolved communism and the Confucianist view of the interaction of the emperor and the population, and I forget their word for it, but it's similar to the ways the Greeks would have talked about the Hellenic and then the barbaros, which didn't literally mean barbarian, it just meant the other. And when you look at what has happened before the British domination, China was the third largest economy in the world, right? And so they see that as their rightful place, top three, really top dog. And the other thing people don't understand is that since the Maoist revolution, it was also a Han Chinese revolution. So there is a massive ethnic component to this. Pre Maoist revolution, you had a far more ethnically diverse China than you do today. You still see it in the food, which is regional, but you don't see it in the people anymore.
Well, you've got an ongoing genocide against the Uyghurs in an effort to purge all non-Han ethnic identities from China. This is on a level. What's really interesting about history, talking about, I'm sure Scott would appreciate this, and we will get back to space, but this is, I think, worth noting, is it's really interesting, the stories we tell based on the alliances at the time. The Soviets, not anything close to nice. I would say that they, at least during their entire period, they actually killed more people than the Nazis. But of course, you can point to the Nazis, the evil guy with the mustache, and 6 million Jews. Everyone can quote that. The Soviets killed more people than he did. The Chinese have probably killed more people than either of them, potentially put together. And
the Soviets killed more Russians than...
That's right.
Yeah, no, they killed their own people. In theory, I guess you could say that the Jews were German, however you want to say that. But they killed their own... Yeah, just to be really clear, they killed their own people on scales that boggle the mind. But sometimes it's easier to overlook when you're not actively at war with them. And so if we want to talk about moral stances, it's a very moral stance to, in my opinion, stand against genocide, especially against an ethnic subgroup inside a country that is attempting to achieve world domination. That's kind of a scary thought if you think about it. To switch, but shifting back to space real quick. We were talking about space futures, and there's a great Space Futures 29 Space Futures, I think it was called 2060, but it was published in 2019, and would highly recommend people get a chance to look it up. You can find it on the Space Force website now. And it basically looked at the future of space and said, okay, so we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but there are 3 elements, and then some mixture of them kind of looks toward where we're going. Is there going to be life in space? Are there going to be lots and lots of people in space? Is there money to be made in space? And who is in leadership in space? Is it going to be us and our allies, or China and they're allies. And so you can have life in space, but not money in space, and it's allied, and you can have a mixture of all of these.
So I want to throw another prompt in there, and maybe this can get us back into some of the space discussion and thinking about how, particularly from a techno-anthropological perspective, right? Which is really where this discussion is. We're at that beautiful mixture of human and tech. One of my favorite quotes from our founding fathers is from Adams, right? I've studied war and politics so that my sons may study math and engineering so that their sons may study poetry and art. If I got that exactly wrong, I apologize. Now,
it's the idea is there, definitely.
Right. Now we realized in our lives that actually somebody has to pay the top two prices constantly, so that some portion of the population can be in that third that is focusing on the beauty and perhaps the most human parts of life. As we think about moving into space, how do we see that happening? Because it seems like right now we are very much fully in the art and in the war and politics part of space. How do we see trying to get out of that into math and engineering? How do we see trying to get out of that to things that are mind expanding, in terms of, how can art look in zero G, for example? I mean, they're amazing things, but you're like, we'll talk about that later, because right now we have to figure out how to make sure that we can stay alive, how to figure out how to make sure that we don't get blown up, and all those other things. How do you see that evolving?
So I'll jump in real quick, Scott, and this will be a quick little.
Well, you actually know something, so please do.
So I think that the first two are going to take place. I think the first one has always been there, war and politics. If we're breaking into these three segments,
sure.
The war and politics has always been there, and I think that there needs to be a return to some of the understanding of hard power and what that looks like in space, and the fact that China in Russia, but China especially, is actively attempting to continue the arms race in space, and the fact that we don't want to compete with them really doesn't mean anything to them. Because quite honestly, they intend to dominate it. And whether we choose to attempt to dominate it or not is irrelevant to the arms race that is currently ongoing. They've doubled the amount of satellites they have in orbit in the last 3 years. So they're still behind us, but I would point out that a lot of our satellites are probably on the older side. So exactly how useful are they going to be in a space conflict? But then what's new and kind of the, if we're going to talk about the economic development that Musk and Blue Origin and a lot of these American commercial companies are actively engaging in, that is, I think, what has to go on at the same time that the Space Force is able to protect those commercial entities, because those commercial entities have to be able to blossom and get outside, in my opinion, get outside of Earth's orbit. Because once we can get outside of Earth's orbit, we have a permanent moon settlement, we have stuff beyond that, that draws the people that are the brave ones. Setting this up for Scott, draws the brave ones, the ones on the edges of society that are willing to take a risk at a new life among the stars. Those are the people that can lead, I believe, humanity off of this Earth and into a future where we can start setting ourselves up in space and expanding beyond this one planet.
I think that's a very good synopsis of the issues involved, but forgetting just the one huge one, which is the domestic self-image of America. I'll use the example of Rome. I know this is a cliche, but it's also the most successful Western empire, which lasted from the Republican days clear up till 1458, if I'm remembering right, the date of the fall of Constantinople. And that polity survived and remained, all built on the attitudes of the society of the late Republican period, where the Roman people could not bear a second place, could not bear it. It was the will of the people to conquer. And when it stopped being the will of the people to conquer, when Augustus said, "This far and no farther," there were still a few conquests, but the empire had stopped expanding. And when it stopped expanding, it became vulnerable. By the time the barbarians came to the gates were wide open and there was just empty land inside because people had already abandoned much of the culture because taxes were so high and because of plagues that could not be resisted that had more than decimated the population. And so Rome thrived in an era when you needed them to sustain trade, to allow localities to prosper, and so on. And the Roman people never openly questioned their right to rule. They knew they were better. They knew the Greeks were a mess, and even though they respected Greek culture, they were certainly not going to turn any part of their empire over to the Greeks until, of course, the Eastern Empire became Greek. But they did not have any self-doubt. That is the opposite of America today. If you want to find the most vehement and dishonest critics of America, you have to go to America. You have to have Americans who have completely denied the facts of our own history in order to concentrate on just a few things we did wrong. So that in their minds, we are the evil empire. And they don't think that we should expand. And if they get enough votes, which they pretty much do, we're not going to be spending that much of our budget taking over and protecting our interests in space. Another historical example, our attacks on, I'm just going to say, Indian tribes were treated in the American mind as if all Indians were the same group. If you make a treaty, the Indians will turn around and break it. And not because there was any lying or perfidy going on, but because their culture did not have control over their young men. Their warrior class could go off and slaughter people here and there and feel pretty darn good about it as heroes at home. In essence, self-destructive terror movement. And so even though the US government, like the British government before it, tried to make laws that kept people on the east side of the Appalachians, people were not going to stay there. They went, and then the cavalry had to follow because we couldn't stand the massacres that happened. We couldn't stand the war that we were losing wherever the Indians chose to concentrate their forces. And so it became a systematic effort to occupy and pacify, meaning subdue, the Indian country in America. And I just read a wonderful book whose title I will not remember by any means because I have no memory, but his history of Indian North America, of the nations, not tribes, but nations that existed with effective boundaries. And with agriculture and all kinds of things we think of as being the benefits of Western Civ, they already had them when we arrived. But we had to destroy them. And some Americans did understand that a Lakota and a Mohawk are not the same people. But if you understood that, it didn't do you any good because to the general American public, they were the same people. And we had the will as a nation to prevail, to settle open land, because the Indians left it open, they didn't fence anything, and destroy any attempt at curtailing ourselves. So we got Rome, we've got us, but it takes that will, a national will. And that's what I think is almost completely lacking in the Western world, not just in America. There are plenty of people who adore the idea of going into space, but they're a minority. Effectively, at the polls, they're a minority because they don't have this wonderful rallying cry, which is, no, let's spend the money here on Earth where it's needed, which is the rallying cry that has been the death of any kind of space program for a long time. It's like the standard Democratic ploy of saying, oh, the Republicans will destroy Social Security, even as the Republicans try to plan ways to save it. The lying goes both directions, but what doesn't come out of it is what comes out of it is polarization and not consensus.
Well,
And
So on that point, right? Just to stick on the point of the folks who say, "Well, we need that money here," right? It's almost, if it's not disingenuous, it's completely ignorant, right? The fact
oh
that
yeah,
speaking to you on a laptop with internet, um, and we navigate via GPS and all these things, right? One of the statistics I read a couple of years ago is that most people don't know it, but by the time they've had their morning breakfast, if they have a smartphone, they've touched space and the benefits of space 10 times. So this is either completely ignorant or disingenuous, um, and I'm sure, depending on who's saying it's either.
well,
But it's
well,
also
you
just
got to
wrong.
remember that in the philosophy of lying, as Cecil Labach divided it, there are lies, and liars have to keep careful track of the truth, so they can protect their lie.
Right.
But then there's bullshitting, which is not lying at all. It's just not caring about the truth. And that's the situation most of our politicians are in. We hold up one particular sad Republican representative from New York State and look at him as the champion liar. And I go, no, he's not the champion liar,
liars,
because he's been caught. If he was any good at it, we wouldn't know about it.
so I have to say, real quick, I have a really interesting thought on, vision, I think would be how I would summarize what we were discussing. But I did see a very interesting Lampoon article that declared that this particular representative in custody, 400 and something other members of Congress still at large.
Yes,
And
Babylon
right.
B. Babylon B had that.
It was very funny.
Yeah.
So the topic of those for discussion is vision, I think, because a nation will only proceed as high as its vision will take it. When its vision is expended, there is nothing else, because there is no consensus. A vision being something like, what do we want to do? We talked about that westward expansion, and Manifest Destiny was what that was called. The vision of the nation, for enough of the nation at least, was that we would be from sea to shining sea. And it was a largely irresistible steamroller that went from the East Coast to the West Coast, ensuring that we had that. In contrast to that, and another historical example, everyone knows 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Most people don't know that in the earlier 1400s, the Chinese had also reached Africa with their fleets, and they were continuing to go further, their treasure fleets and other things. We know this, among other reasons, that there's a village in Africa that's basically like 90-something% Chinese DNA, because the Chinese ship wrecked there. The sailors intermarried with the local village. But as the Chinese were continuing to try to expand, they reached the point where the internal politics of China said, this is too disruptive. We need to spend this money here. And so we're just going to let the ships rot in harbor. And China turned inward. And that was fine for about 400 years, from about 1430, 1450 or so, until about the same 1850 or so, until this other upstart nation that had in 1400s was barely worth mentioning. By 1850, they showed up on the Chinese doorstep. I'm, of course, talking about England. They showed up on the Chinese doorstep and said, hey, we've got the weight of the world behind us. We've circumnavigated the globe. We have navies and all sorts of things. We can mass power, national power, and you will trade with us, and you will sell your people opium. And obviously that was the beginning of the 100 years of humiliation in the Chinese narrative. They have not forgotten that, in my opinion. They are radically aware, and it is being reinforced to them. They must not turn inward again, because whoever does not turn inward, whoever reaches outward and seeks to expand, they will be the ones that dominate the 2100s.
It's almost an anti-Socratic philosophy, right? Because know thyself, right, and all that, and in many ways, that's what we're doing in the West, right? I'm of Indian extraction, but my parents came to this country for the same reason. Millions upon millions upon millions of immigrants showed up here. Opportunity, education, and better life.
And
right?
by now, you look American to me, and so and so that's we do still live up to some of our ideals. We do, but not
Absolutely.
enough.
And to a point you made earlier about the problems faced by Europe versus America, as somebody who's a first generation American, right? It's very interesting to watch because Europe doesn't assimilate, right? You can be a fourth generation African living in France or Germany, but you're not French or German. Whereas we grant, the birthright, birthright citizenship is actually a massively powerful concept that perhaps came about by accident, from the perspective of assimilating cultures into your own. I mean, we're much more like the Borg, right? We've California. When I'm in Beijing and I see Apple and Nike and KFC, I'm like, we have Californicated Beijing. But jumping back to some of your work and thoughts in this techno anthropological regime, Scott, how do you see additional lessons from the past? We right, it's become a theme of our discussion, right? We know the old phrase, the past doesn't repeat itself, but history doesn't repeat itself, but often echoes or often rhymes, right? What other aspects of where we are now and where we want to go, which is a vision of a relative, the same idea we've had really for since 1776 of a type of freedom of individual and economy, take that to space. How do you see the different failure modes playing out around that, sir? You've pointed to one, lack of will. What else can we do differently than we are doing now to succeed?
The best thing we're doing now is leaving it in the hands of commercial forces. As soon as people are making a fortune, as soon as we basically have an asteroid rush, as soon as somebody is making huge fortunes by bringing rocks closer or mining what we want to from them and bringing it closer, then there will be a drive to go out there. And if there's something Americans are best at, it's making a profit. I've been watching a brilliantly done History Channel. Can't believe it because I thought they had succumbed entirely to ancient aliens, but a really brilliant series called The Food That Made America, which gives us, decent reenactments, decent scripts showing how entrepreneurs got a vision and some of them acted insanely. Hershey in Pennsylvania built the city before he had mastered making milk chocolate. He knew he wanted to make milk chocolate. He located it in a place with lots of cows so that he could make milk chocolate, but he didn't know how to make one that tasted good. And you look at it and you go, this madman, what was he thinking? But his madness could all take place within the safe structure of the American East, which had been civilized by our standards for quite some time. And so he didn't have to worry about other things. The economic system was going to keep going. There is no economic system in space. There are no enforceable rules about what you can and cannot do with your asteroid. If you get an asteroid, you can propel it toward Earth orbit. And we really hope that you're successful at not colliding with Earth, because that could be an extinction level event. And so we are allowing into the hands of foreign countries and alien civilizations, as we have them on Earth, and our own most rapacious capitalists, the power to destroy the Earth, and without using nuclear weapons, without doing anything other than dropping rocks. I know we all saw this in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. It's part of our education, though many of us read it, first of all, to say, could there actually be self-sustaining life on the moon without having to keep bringing up ships full of oxygen from the Earth? And of course, now we know, yeah, if we manufacture things the right way on the moon, it could be self-sustaining with the needed level of atmosphere in the interior spaces. But What I'm afraid of is that we Americans, because we are the leaders of the West, even though the rest of the West resents it, we Americans will respond too late. We'll try to build up our military force in space after Pearl Harbor. But there'll be no safe sanctuary where we can build the ships that we need. When all of our satellites are picked off in one big operation by the Chinese force in space, are we prepared to replace them? And the answer is no, not if we're going to be taking off from Earth to do it, because they can see every launch that goes from the surface of the Earth into space. What we have to have is a substantial force that lives in space and a substantial number of absolutely identical communications satellites and GPS satellites, so that every time one of them is taken out, we already have a stockpile in space to replace them. Otherwise, we're doomed on Earth. We won't have supremacy here on this Earth planet, let alone in space. And so what I'm afraid of is that in typical American fashion, we will finally get ready for a war after it's already begun. And in a way, we can say it's already begun now with the Chinese, but I live in dread of the Chinese getting a permanent base from which they can launch anti-satellite weapons on the moon, on the far side of the moon, so we can't see their launches unless we have communication satellites that have that vantage point. I mean, we are right now so vulnerable. And I don't hear any politicians talking about it. Now, here's the American psyche. We always oppose the government doing anything that expands its power until we hope it has that power. And then we hope there was a secret Manhattan Project going on that they never told us about, so that we go, oh, no, we knew this was happening. We're ready. Here we go. But we don't, because government can't keep secrets, at least not the American government. Secrets are impossible, which is why I always laugh at conspiracy theories like the CIA killed Kennedy. I go, oh, really? And who kept that secret? Really? There's no way, no American is not going to blow the whistle on something that ridiculous and obscene against our national safety. So what I'm hoping for is that we'll be alert to the dangers before thousands of people die and ships sink in Pearl Harbor.
And yeah, I was going to say, so dovetailing off of that, let's not forget, when the United States entered World War II, we still had cavalry units with horses.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let me underline that. We had cavalry units with horses. We make fun of the Polish, no offense.
They're brave cavalry charges against tanks, yeah.
Who charged the tanks with sabers. Let's not forget, if we had been invaded in 39, we very well might have been the ones charging the tanks with sabers. So, yeah, the Americans are, unfortunately, we are great at entering a war after it's already started. And by the way, I would consider that it has been. So, because Zaheer, you were talking earlier, jumping back to the previous point slightly, but tying it in, how maybe the West is knowing themselves too much. I would actually disagree with that point, because knowing yourself entails truth. What we do not have truth about ourselves. We have propaganda. Propaganda is the skillful application of some truth. I would actually even group it potentially even under information operations, which would be a military attack against a population's psyche by destroying what they think of their nation. And so, for instance, if I were China and I were wanting to destroy the American ability to fight, I would make everyone think that America is a horrible, evil, nasty place and we need to tear it down. At that point, China doesn't have to do anything. We're already going to do it to ourselves. And it's a psychological attack. It's, like I said, I would term it information operations. And it is an attack, not perhaps kinetic, how we would usually represent war, but it is effective at strategic goals nonetheless.
It is a tool of war, right? Information has always been. How do you see do we believe, like the three of us, is Artemis enough to reignite some of this passion? It has captured a lot of imagination. I feel it's not. I feel they could do more with that. But how do we go beyond that? Beyond just rah 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 flag planting to what you've said is, look, we need people there. We need a stockpile of assets in space.
Well, so okay, I'm going to jump in because, as Scott would say, this is my wheelhouse. So no, Artemis is not enough. It's a good first step, but it's a first step. Artemis's big pitch when they started out, they were like, okay, we're going to make a moon base, and that was almost muted. But the big push was, we're going to put a woman on the moon. Great. That really doesn't matter to me, to be quite honest. I mean, that's great. I'm glad we're putting a woman on the moon, but that's not going to solve a strategic competition.
We have to have that in order to have a self-replicating population, but we're still way away from that.
True. Yeah, yes, you have to have women on the moon. You don't have to just have the first woman. But it's a good first step. But Artemis should be, I think, expanded so much more, because instead of just thinking small, that, okay, we have a Space Force here and we have Artemis here and we're going to kind of do space science. Instead, I think it should be a much more expansive take on space of the United States saying, we are the acknowledged leaders of the world in the attempt to further world peace and bring everyone into this space age. We are going to lead the world into space. We are going to set up a moon base. We are going to set up essentially apartments so that we can let these to other nations that are peace-loving and in keeping with the norms that are being established in space. And we want to help the entire world reach this next frontier and to benefit from the economic dividends that will come from this. That's, I think, a much more expansive, much more motivating vision than we want to put a woman on the moon. I would say one thing, company that has done this incredibly well has been SpaceX. SpaceX gets a lot of the top talent in the space market. They recruit incredibly well, but they also have an amazing stated vision of, we are going to Mars and we are going to colonize Mars. That is a massive vision that if SpaceX can fulfill that, that will be obviously it'll be a first in human history, being able to colonize another celestial body. That's incredibly exciting. And to get the people that actually have the drive and catches their imaginations on fire, that's what you need. You don't need, we're just going to go back, and a lot of people were even asking me, like, why are we doing Artemis? We've already been to the moon, which is plugging my book for just a moment. And then I'm sorry, I'll let Scott.
Go ahead. No.
But
plug your book.
On my book. This is why the phases of space development are so important. You can't just go to a location. It is why you are going there. What sort of piece are you doing of that development? If I go to some spot out in the middle of the forest and then I come back, okay, great. It is entirely different once I go to that place in the forest. I set up a cabin. I have a solar generator. I have a water system. I can stay there permanently. And now maybe I can drive from there to another city that I need to go to, and it takes me 10 minutes versus 50 minutes that it would have taken from my home city. It's an entirely different mindset to have.
Yeah. One of the things that Americans generally don't recognize is how small the moon is, how small the distances are. That when the shadow of the moon, when the moon is not as wide as Australia, you have to go, okay. So once you have a base there needs to be some system of land transportation to get from base to base, something that can't be shot out of the sky to get from base to base. And we need multiple bases. We need redundancy. And all of this, to me, is actually the most important thing about it is redundancy. I want the human race to be self-sustainingly established in places that won't be destroyed if Earth becomes uninhabitable for whatever reason. I mean, we have not yet received all the asteroid visitors we're going to receive in the history of this planet. We are going to have another, extinction level event. What will we do to be ready for it? By the way, global warming is ridiculously not that. I mean, the Earth has been much warmer and life has not been threatened. And so, the thing that threatens us is having all of our eggs in this one basket, the Earth. And so we have, go ahead.
You talk about asteroids. Don't forget, there's also Carrington events, which are essentially a massive EM pulse from the sun. That would not be good either.
No. There's so many things that the universe can do to us that we need to be prepared for. It's like, when I heard people 30 years ago saying, there's no reason for us to go to space, and I go, telecommunications. I know we can just throw those up there. We don't have to go into space. And then I had to say, someday there will be an asteroid that can wipe out all life on Earth on a collision course. And are we ready to do anything about it? Now, we've had Deep Impact and Armageddon as popular movies that raised these issues, and they were nowhere near as effective as Jaws in scaring people. Jaws kept people off the beaches for a while, but these scary things don't make us go, we've got to be up there. Well, I was so happy when we were able to move an asteroid from its course. That was just such a breakthrough, because it showed that we were looking to try to do that, and to realize that there really are people searching for earthbound objects. So that makes me happy, but I still feel like we need to be scattered around. We need to plant our seeds in other gardens, and we don't have a consensus for that. Nothing like it, because right now, America itself is in the middle of a civil war. We're stupid enough not to notice that there have already been battles on the streets of our cities, that there have already been serious attempts at using propaganda and force to take away the free expression of other people. There was a time when you could have an unpopular opinion and still keep your job. We're not in that time now. If you want employment, you have to conform to the loudest, rudest minority's view. And they're far from being a majority. Most people are disgusted by the things that they get upset about. And yet they win every time because there's nobody willing to speak against them. The few here and there. And you guys talk about the public perception of Artemis. There is no public perception of Artemis. You guys live in a culture in which you are constantly thinking of and talking about space. I live in the real world where nobody gives a rat's ass, and where the name Artemis is only taught in the Greek versus Roman mythology courses. And you go, oh, Diana is Artemis. Okay, that's as far as we get. And Artemis was the sidekick in Wild Wild West. Yeah, we have to remember that. It became a male name instead of a female name. But nobody knows about it. Nobody knows we're doing it. And when I say nobody, I mean almost nobody. There is an educated elite that is aware, but I dare say that most of the people who are dominant on talk television, on news television, have no idea, or only the vaguest idea, of what Artemis is and what it's for, what it will be, what it can do. And so to think about expanding beyond Artemis is like thinking about laser weapons along with nuclear weapons in 1945. Laser didn't exist yet, and so nobody could think about that. And nobody could think of communication satellites. Nobody could think of those things until somebody did and made us think about them. We don't have an incentive to get the American people behind Artemis because they don't even know about it. And because they don't see the danger.
Yeah. Well, and I would agree with you. If I go out down the street and I ask someone, so tell me about Artemis, they would most likely look at me blankly. I would readily agree with you. And I think this is also something I've thought about pretty extensively, is the moon missions for, I heard a really interesting analysis that the moon missions to with the Apollo program, that the only reason they were successful was because JFK made the speech, "We choose to go to the moon," and then he was killed. And so in the dead president's memory, because this was his shining goal, that it was continued despite the fact it was eating a significant amount of the national budget. Most likely, if he had not been assassinated, he might not have been able to maintain support for it during the period that was required. And unfortunately, and I think this is really unfortunate, that NASA grew up, so to speak, in that period of almost unique support, national support for a space mission. And because they grew up in that, once it was over and we achieved the moon landings, the first moon landing was obviously televised, and it was a showstopper. In Apollo 13, the movie, obviously they are representing the less national interest that was even a couple of Apollo missions later.
Yeah, it was only two missions later. It was like a year and a half.
No one was watching.
It wasn't like years and years.
No, we paid attention because they might die, and we hadn't had the shuttle disasters yet.
Yes, and that was the point, is that even 2 missions later, after the successful Apollo 11, Apollo 13, no one's even watching it. It's old news, because Americans, among other things, we are flooded with information. And so we get tired of things very, very quickly if they're not new and flashy. And
the amazing thing is that happened before video games, before Twitter,
or social
before the
media,
internet,
or any of that. So we're coming up on time, gentlemen, and I want to give each of you an opportunity to kind of something. We've branched across a huge variety of discussions. We looked at our current concerning adversary. Thankfully our republic has weathered a few storms. Whether or not but every circumstance is different, and we're exposed to different vulnerabilities now. So we've looked at that. We've thought about what are the next steps we have to have. Whether it's from the anthropological standpoint, as Scott has discussed, for various aspects of our society, from the phasing of the technology and the steps, as Josh has described, and I urge you guys to check out his book and learn more about his thoughts in detail there. To close up, what can we do in our community? Because the viewers of this are primarily people who live in our bubble. As you put it, Scott. But having you participate hopefully will encourage more people from the non-space community to be part of this. How do we think about this in our daily lives? How do we go about moving this forward? Because there's a tendency for people to say, well, even now, space is commercial, but it's the province of billionaires, right? Billionaire boys with toys, right? You see headlines like that, right? Or it's the province of government. But it sounds like what we've been saying in many different ways is that the average Joe on the street needs to take some ownership of this, even in a microscopic way. How do we get there? How do we get to that?
The easy answer is propaganda, of course, but for every speck of pro-space propaganda, there will be 10 times as much anti-space propaganda, because it is a nationalist effort. It requires you to believe that America is good, that it'll be a good thing if we dominate in space and not the other guys. And the idea that setting up an American-like society in space will be good for the human race. That's the propaganda project that is doomed. It needs to be undertaken, but by itself, it's doomed until we feel threatened. And getting Americans to feel threatened in our arrogant position through most of my lifetime of, we're the big boys, one American plane can shoot down 20 Russian MiGs. And, that kind of nonsense. We've seen that over and over again in history, the hubris of the dominant power that is riding for a fall. That is us. We have become much more corrupt. We used to not be at that, at the local level, we had corruption, but not at the national level. Now, at the national level, we have such corruption. We have thrown away freedom of speech. It doesn't exist in America anymore on various topics. And we have this civil war going on. How in the world can a nation polarized like ours, where I have met so many young people who don't think of themselves as Democrats, they just know that all Republicans are evil and that anything Republicans want must be bad for the world. That is a huge propaganda success from the left. Unfortunately, while they've been nowhere near as successful, the right is also telling the same story about the left, that they're evil, that they're going to destroy everything. What we need is to have a civil conversation again, is to be able to offer various viewpoints and disagree without you losing your chance for employment anywhere in the country. That you can decide who you want to make a cake for without being hounded into bankruptcy. Where people are allowed freedom to make even bad choices, freedom to make choices that other people disapprove of. We have some that we all agree, murder should not be allowed, but at the same time, why have we criminalized speech? Why have we criminalized dissident science, which is the enemy of science, to do that, to threaten legal penalties for anybody who does not preach the doctrine of global warming, or against anybody who varies from what is the woke view of the world, or the conservative view of the world, which is nowhere near as coherent, every bit as self-contradictory, though, as the left view. So both sides are stupid beyond belief, are self-contradictory, and are angry all the time. And we are now, in terms of public division, pretty much in 1860. We have the election of 1860 ahead of us right now, and we have no candidates that have emerged with any possibility of winning who have any kind of vision. We have the chameleon who decided which party would give him the best opportunity and now talks the talk as if he actually believed it. We have the corrupt old Paul, who has never had a very good nodding acquaintance with truth, who is president currently. They're both ridiculous choices. It's as bad as 2016, when both parties nominated the worst candidate they had to offer. And we had to choose between them. I think that we barely made a semi-right choice, but that doesn't make him the be-all and end-all. I don't see any sign that he would be the champion of space. Nobody talks that way. Nobody is willing to hitch their wagon to that particular star, to quote Emerson badly. So what I'm looking at is we need to get our house in order. We need to end this civil war with the complete defeat of anybody who calls another person a rhino, a Republican in name only, as a way to destroy them politically on the right, or somebody on the woke left calling them various blank phobes, fill in whatever phobe you want them to be. Ridiculous stuff. And get back to the business of government, which is, to quote Calvin Coolidge, business. But have a protected environment where trade can make America prosper. And when we have prosperity, we have choices. So none of this is in space. We have to get our own house in order. And that's an anthropological problem. It's a political problem. And I don't see anybody, a few exceptions, a few tiny exceptions, who are voices crying in the wilderness. Very few people are actually trying to tackle that one head on without taking one side or the other. Because the moment you say, you need to be tolerant of this side, the other side says, oh, you're one of them. And nothing you say will get listened to by that side. There's no even-handed broker to help us. And I'm listening to a book about the nomination and election of Abraham Lincoln, and it's been illuminating to know that he was nominated as the centrist candidate until the moment he got the nomination. And then the Democrats, the conservative force then, the pro-slavery group, they started crucifying him as if he had been Seward, who believed that there had to be war to straighten out the slavery problem. Well, we have a problem just as big as the slavery problem. We can't point it out. There's no single victim population, but there is America, which is being beaten by this political stupidity. And I'm speaking with great frankness because, man, it is stupid. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. I remember when anti-communism was the rule for the very good reason that Russia had spies everywhere and stole some of our secrets. And it was important for us to recognize that communism was a dangerous enemy everywhere in the world. But we don't have that kind of consensus anymore. We don't see China as a dangerous enemy. Are we going to have to wait until Taiwan is destroyed and America loses its ability to make microchips? Is it going to take, right now, Hong Kong is still getting special treatment, but not forever.
Yeah, it's still bad over there.
Oh, I know, but it's certainly worse than it was under the British. Makes the British, isn't it?
Oh,
nice
well, that's what I mean.
some-
As in, it's not, people have this image that, they're not doing anything there. It's bad. But,
Yeah.
but
Sorry, I've gone on and on, but yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for your thoughts. More quotable sound bites than I think we know what to do with. But the message is clear. We have to get back to talking like real people and reprioritize what we're doing. Josh, let me give you the last word.
Thank you. So two quick thoughts to fill in around the edges of what Scott already said. Well, and for the first one's actually an addendum to something you said, that we've overcome enemies before and we will do it again. I certainly hope so. What previous enemies did not have was an economic power, an economic mass to be able to match our own. We dwarfed the entire axis before World War II. Germany, Italy, and Japan. We overmatched all three of them combined in our economic and industrial capacity. The USSR could never hope to match our economic clout during the Cold War as well. We have a China that is actively attempting to match us, attempting to currently de-dollar much of the international system, and interesting watching some channels I particularly enjoy watching, putting out propaganda about the fact that the dollar is done and you need to get in line with the RMB, the Chinese monetary system. This is very interesting. This is the first time that the United States has had to face an opponent. We can't just outproduce them. In a lot of ways, China produces more than we do, actually, and they have a larger industrial capacity. And so
they produce a lot of our production.
So this is a very difficult situation that we find ourselves in. And I think the first and foremost, strategically, we need to be recapturing our industrial and manufacturing capacities. And something that we can do. So there's obviously, you said, on a day-to-day, what can people do, especially people in the space industry? Partially be willing to have honest conversations, be willing to engage with truth as an objective thing outside of both you and the other person, that both of you can perhaps have a conversation, an honest conversation. And instead of relying on availability bias and confirmation bias, actually trying to reach to something that both of you can, even if you can't agree on what should be the pursuit, at least agree on what's there, agree on objective reality, agree on truth. Even if you disagree with the best way to then move from that point. Because ultimately, if we don't, I think that plays back into Scott's point. If we are not able to even agree on what truth is, it's impossible to come up with a coherent plan and a coherent execution. But on the other hand, if the people that are leading that are the people in the space industry, then I think that gives us a unique opportunity to really further our goals. Because, as you pointed out, Zaheer, there is the billionaires make the headlines. You have Blue Origin, SpaceX. These are the rockets that are doing it. But there's a multitude of other space companies. Everything from a company that's 3D printing rockets and all the cool stuff they're doing, to Orbital Fab, to unfortunately I'm blanking on his name, but I met a fine gentleman who is a CEO for a small company. He produces cages for microchips. So you can take, most microchips have to be, even it's a small piece, but it's a very important piece.
Right.
Often you have to harden computer chips to be able to operate in a radiological environment that you find in space. And he is able to take this proprietary thing he's got. You can slap any chip off the shelf in there, and you've got an operating capability that is hours out of date versus often years out of date. They have to be to appropriately do that. It's a small company, but even that small little piece is something that can contribute to the overall space economy. So in review, we should not be complacent. This is not, in my opinion, this is the largest threat that the United States has ever faced. Larger than the Nazis, larger than the Japanese, and larger than the USSR, for the simple purpose that this adversary economically is able to match us almost. And they are rapidly growing their military, which is what happens after you have economic capacity. You start growing your military capacity. They doubled their satellite capacity in the last 3 years.
So,
they're still that's significant.
Yeah. So I mean, this is really actionable, right? For the space professionals, we have to choose to become ambassadors for space. And I really appreciate your point, going back to what Scott said, that being very technical, one of my physics professor used to say to us when we would get upset about how hard problem sets were, he would say, "Guys, sorry, physics doesn't care about your feelings." And that's a reality. So if we can start with physics and move out from there, because at least the physics, if you do figure out a way to break it, you get a Nobel Prize. So yeah, exactly, cha-ching, right? So this is really amazing. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for a spectacular conversation. We didn't even touch on the AI revolution, on currency. There's things we can go into, particularly maybe get Jason Lowry on here and talk about software and the projection of power through currency. We didn't talk about energy. All of these topics Josh has addressed in different facets in Spacepower Ascendant, and of course Scott has addressed in a variety of amazing visions. Sometimes I almost feel like you're channeling another universe when I've read your books. Is this really a guy writing it, or is he just channeling stuff from somewhere else? And so
from other science fiction writers.
Yeah, it's happening over there, and he's just a conduit, like some sort of psychic medium, to the keyboard. So thank you both for a spectacular discussion. Thank you to America's Future Series for hosting us. Thank you to Comtech and Zero North for making this series possible. Everybody who works on this series is a volunteer, and they provide our ability to have things like Zoom accounts and websites and whatnot. So appreciate that. Hopefully we can welcome you gentlemen back soon, but I know that this discussion, we were really honest with each other. Just like you said, Scott, I don't think we agree on every single thing between the three of us, but that's okay. What we do agree on is that we need a better way forward. And thank you for providing some really amazing discussion about how we can do that. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.